I will be discussing the special education situation in the context of a group of islands surrounding the core idea of special ed. The groups that I will be discussing in this are the children along with their families, the teachers, the leadership in special needs education, special needs assistants or SNAs, special education needs coordinators or SENCOs, and then I will finally draw some conclusions from all this. So it should come as no surprise that the most important person involved in special education is the child or children themselves. And yet, in comparison to the other involved groups, there is very little work done, either in research or more importantly in policy, that takes the child's voice into account. A comparative study conducted in Italy asked identical questions of teachers and students on the topic of integration. The study found that the answers were different in every classroom between teachers and their students, and yet the ability to observe was indistinguishable between both parties. It has been shown that there is a belief among certain researchers that it is better to leave out the child's voice from studies. The different forms of communication used by children with disabilities can often serve as an excuse, or realistically a cop-out, from inclusion to these studies. Even in studies focusing on advocacy for the child, it is seen as more important to take school professionals' voices into account before the child's. While the voices of families has been shown to have positive and negative impacts on getting the child's perspective across, it is important to ensure that the child's voice isn't ignored based off this influence. While the family should be spoken to independently as well, the child does offer a completely different perspective. Parents, due to their relationship with their children, allow for children to feel more sufficiently comfortable to glean more from them than we as researchers would otherwise get. In contrast to the child's voice, there are volumes upon volumes studying the teacher's perspective in special education. A recurring statement is made that mainstream teachers are not trained sufficiently or provided with enough resources. This has led to the conclusion that the mainstream system won't work in accounting for significant additional care needs, which has led to an argument for the retention of special schools and special classes. Another regularly explored aspect is the impact the collection of data has on students. Recently in Ireland we had the whistleblower situation where government departments held dossier on children with autism outside their parents' knowledge, which will inevitably do little to alleviate their concerns. Teachers were also recorded to be anxious about how their performance would be viewed when taking into account children with special needs in a mainstream setting. Taking a top-down approach to special education requires the leadership to be examined. This has led to a recognition of the difficulty in bringing the theory of an inclusive educational system into practice. This piece accurately depicted the conflict between the psychology and sociology in overcoming the barriers between special education and inclusive education. They phrased this as the paradigmatic war between psychology and sociology. Other work has shown a need for school leaders to follow through with a vision that would raise the achievements of all. For this to work, the report highlights it would require an emphasis on high quality teaching that would result in greater results for students across the board. The position that a lot of children with special needs would interact with the most in an educational setting is the special needs assistant, or SNA. And yet, there is a significant amount of misunderstanding in what the role actually entails, not being quite as black and white as the remit given by the Department of Education. This states that the SNA is to provide additional care needs to a child, primarily care needs that could not be met in a situation where a change with the environment, with their peers or with the teacher would allow for these provisions to be met. And yet, studies have consistently shown that SNAs have been required to go far and beyond this remit, with their duties extending into teaching, administration, behavioural and even therapeutic duties. I've spoken to SNAs who have been required to do OT once an hour with students, who have been required to be actively teaching the students, and then obviously taking into account behavioural issues. Behavioural issues, while not nicely fitting in with a nice bow on top for the Department of Education, are a fact of life. There are children with special needs who exhibit highly challenging behaviour, and this can be termed self-injurious behaviour, aggression towards others, dangerous to the environment, and more. This is a reality of life for many children, and SNAs are the ones regularly in the firing line, which makes it criminal that it has taken up until January of this year for the Department of Education to actually put forward comprehensive training for special needs assistant. Previously, it was acknowledged that the provision of an SNA was viewed as a solution to problems. The issue that arises when someone is seen as a solution is when subsequent problems arise, they can become very easily a source of blame. One of the relatively recent new roles introduced in the field of special education is that of a Special Education Needs Coordinator, or SENCO. Now, internationally, this name can vary slightly due to local preferences, but there has been significant studies done internationally on this, which has found that even amongst SENCOs or equivalents, there is disharmony on what the role actually entails. Now, logically, if the SENCOs themselves aren't consistent on what the role entails, this will inevitably lead to a misunderstanding of what the role entails by their colleagues in a mainstream setting, as well as the parents of the children with which they are working. This has led to a conversation on the ability of a SENCO to be able to anticipate eventualities that may arise and or deal with issues as they inevitably do, the reactive versus proactive. This study also laments a commonly recurring theme where there is a lack of communication between concerned parties in special education. There has long been a mentality in the Irish educational system that we know what's best for the child. That ideology puts the lie into every ideal of inclusion that the department or advocacy groups can put a circulatory about when it comes to inclusion. We will never have an inclusive system until the child's voice is recognised and heard regularly. It seems that every research paper has a part in its conclusion which is some variation on more communication is needed. This has been popping up in research for decades with no signs of this sought-after communication occurring. It never has been acceptable that a child can miss out on a better educational experience because people who claim to have the child's best interest at heart aren't willing to engage with others. We live in a time where viruses are the main news headline. 24/7 we're hearing about vaccines, about viruses, about cures. There is a perception in the educational system that if an SNA is provided or a SENCO is appointed, that somehow the system can get better. There isn't a miracle cure for a sick system. A root and branch approach will involve far less patting oneself on the back. It'll involve a longer time frame, but it could give us the first educational system in state history that doesn't fail the child. I'm going to wrap this up with a paraphrase David Gemmell quote. "If I am to do any good, let me do it now, for I may not pass this way again." Thank you.